What's going on YouTube? So in response to Scotty Kilmer's video on the 1.5 liter Ecoboost and some of the things that he said, I'm going to make a in-depth, honest review on his video and actually explain to you from a professional what goes into rebuilding these motors, the short blocks, the replacements, all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to go from there. I've got the most probably information and videos on the internet about this situation. So if anybody would know internet-based info-wise on what goes into this stuff, it would be me, especially with the amount of videos and information I've put out to you guys and helped you. Actually, we have one in the shop right now that just came in probably about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and we had to wait on a motor, and they just can't come up with enough engines and stuff right now with trying to work on these things. There's a 2 liter down here getting rebuilt, and it's dependent on the specific type of engine. There was a few times in the video where he said it didn't make sense to reuse the short block. It actually does, and I'll explain more about what goes into that. There's 2 other engines that also go along with this, which is called a coolant intrusion problem. And we'll get into the video and I'll explain what that is. I know Scotty means well, but in this video he did a lot of dogging and he did a lot of kind of like undercut jabs and stuff when he didn't really explain or show what you could have shown to figure out if the timing belt was installed incorrectly. And that was the main premise of what he said, was because the gentleman's getting worse fuel mileage, then that means that something wasn't done correctly, and that's not it at all. I'll explain more. If the timing belt wasn't installed correctly, the vehicle wouldn't be running like it did, and the PID data that he actually showed would be way more out of whack than what it actually is. So let's talk more about that and get into Scotty's video here, and in the video I'll be breaking it down.
Turbocharged GDI engines. Here's a total case in point. The 2017 Ford, it's got the 1.5 liter Ecoboost. So it's a tiny little engine. It has gasoline direct injection and a turbocharger. And what happened at about 60,000 miles? The engine blew up. Yeah, that's all that this engine lasted. 60,000 miles.
Well, another fresh build done. Running, full of coolant, brand new oil and stuff in it. You can hear how noisy these engines are, even brand new. Now if I put the cover on, it would quieten it down tremendously. But this is a fresh build, just done. The whole motor cleaned out, the cylinder head cleaned out, new injectors, new injector seals, new spark plugs, new everything. I just got done building this motor, and you can hear this is normal. The high pressure pump, the clatter and stuff coming from the valve train, it's all completely normal. The only time that I've ever been able to get this engine quieter than what it is right now is when I actually built the cylinder heads myself and I did all the clearances myself. That's the only time I've ever got it to go super, super quiet. But when you get them from the factory and you're re-putting the buckets and stuff back in for the valves, I've never been able to get them any more quiet than this, because you're basically taking everything from the factory and putting it back in there. Now the one time that I did have spark plugs that were froze up in the head, I was able to go order a new cylinder head and then come back and set each valve exactly how I wanted it. And I did it a little bit more, just a hair on the tighter side, but still within spec. The motor was super quiet. Really, really nice.
And then put what's called a short block on. The block was ruined, so they put a new block in. They used the head over. It was about a $7,700 bill. He got it back immediately. It ran worse. Now, at least it ran, because it blew and didn't work at all. But before, he was getting 30 miles a gallon, and when he's driving uphill, he does a lot of uphill, downhill. He lives high and he works low. He was getting 30 miles a gallon then. Now he's lucky to get 23.
So one thing that could have been an issue here is if enough of that coolant intrusion that was going on with this motor got into the exhaust system itself, there could be some further damage that's done to like the catalytic converter for efficiency and stuff. Maybe O2 sensors not reading correctly, but that's not protocol on the actual TSB on replacing the short block for the coolant intrusion. Also, depending on the level of experience from the technician and how much he's actually done these, resetting the keep alive memory, fuel tables and stuff like that can also have an effect on this. Plus, I've had it to where I've done a short block. A customer put 10,000 miles on the vehicle. True story. I actually have a video in my library if anybody wants to check that out. And they, it was like just right at 10,000 or a little over 10,000 miles, and they started complaining about a knocking hesitation type thing at times. And when I actually went into the vehicle while it was running, and I was able to look at the ethanol table and the fuel content, it was terrible. They had got some really rough fuel somewhere. There's a lot of ethanol in it. It was trying to really make up for adjustment of the timing components, and it was running rough at times. And what I did was I drained as much fuel out as I could. I took my own money because I felt bad for the customer, and it was really difficult to get a hold of anybody anyway because there was so much going on at the dealership. I ran over here to the local Shell gas station. I put some 91 or 93 in it, some fresh fuel. I put about $30 worth, and then I took out and I ran it on the highway. And as I was running and I was monitoring the spark advance adjustment for the timing components, I was able to see as I was running that fresh fuel through there, because I seen something going wrong with fuel. It started bringing the adjustment down, and all of a sudden it was running really good. It was a matter of them. They just got some really poor quality fuel after this build, and they thought it had something to do with what I did. But 10,000 miles later, if that just shows up, and you've actually, done, I think she went through 2 oil changes at that point, everything was fine, and then all of a sudden it shows up. It's not the build. It's typically something that somebody's doing. I can't make excuses for how the vehicle was built, but these are the facts. This is the situation it could be. I can't speak for what happened.
So obviously, they didn't fix the thing right in the first place.
Good morning, everybody. I am on a 17 Escape right now. Now, I rebuilt this motor. I actually put a new block in this vehicle, as well as cylinder head, and gapped I set all the valve clearance and everything nice. Actually better than factory, so this motor has a little bit more wear tolerance to it. I set it smack dab in the middle. I find the factory valve clearance is typically either really loose or really tight. I set it in the middle on this vehicle, so this motor ended up being really quiet when I was done doing everything. And this lady's been driving this vehicle for 10,000 miles, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a P130D code popped up. And she took it to another dealer. And I was watching I was looking through the guy's story on his pinpoint test, and it says DG6, he answered it a specific way, and then DG7, he answered it a specific way. And I'm looking at how he answered it and following the pinpoint test, and I was like, wait a second. Why does he say that he answered DG7 this way? And it says what you need to do is check fuel quality if it's yes, or check or replace knock sensors if it's no. He says he did this neutral profile correction and reset cam and all this other stuff. That's not even part of the pinpoint test. And the guy claimed labor time based off what he did. Well, it shows up back here at my dealership because the customer's like, it didn't fix the problem. Something's still wrong with the vehicle. So I get it. I start looking at fuel quality on this vehicle because this thing hasn't misfired. It hasn't did anything. Hasn't ran poorly in 10,000 miles. I want to know why I'm getting a knock on the cylinders randomly. So there's a quarter tank of fuel in the vehicle, and this vehicle's typically driven in more rural areas, very long distance, so it stretches its legs quite a bit. I pull some fuel out of the fuel system, and I start to see the water separating inside the plastic water bottle. And I was like, wait, this doesn't seem right. It seems like there's water in this. Doesn't seem like very good fuel quality. I smell the fuel. The fuel smells really weak. It smells like there's a shit ton of ethanol in it. And it just doesn't seem like good fuel in general.
The original problem is it's a relatively decent-sized SUV, but it's got this tiny little engine in it, and it's turbocharged. And as I said over and over again, these things just don't hold up over time. It's bad enough when you see the ones that have the V6 engine that's got the turbocharged in a GDI Ecoboost engines with Ford. They had all those problems with the water pumps being chain driven. Then they break, then the engine's destroyed.
Now on the 6-cylinder engines, what he spoke about here, I've got plenty of experience with them as well. The engine's not destroyed. Typically there's a upper weep hole and there's a lower weep hole. What it will do is it'll leak out of the lower weep hole, and it will come down the front cover right on the outside. And it's the first indication that the water pump's leaking. Typically when we go in there to do a chain or something like that, if the phasers are getting too far out of adjustment, we'll go ahead and do a water pump as well, or vice versa. Now, there have been some instances, I will give him that, on coolant getting in the oil. If you catch it early enough, the motor's not destroyed. It just needs to be flushed out real good, and then some quality oil put in, and then maybe 500 to 1,000 miles, change it again. By then, you're typically clear, but that's here nor there.
This is a different design because it's only a 4-cylinder engine, but at the same time, the engine only lasted 60,000 miles and blew up. It's still running like crap, so let's see why. It's time for intelligent diagnosis. Figured that out fast? Realize this thing's only got 76,000 miles, and it's 60-something thousand. It had to have the engine replaced. Problems with the body control module. We'll see if anything else is showing up. The PCM system. Let's start with the PCM. Active grill shutter performance stuck off. These things are so insane. They have a grill here that electronically opens and closes, so you don't get too much drag when you don't need it, and then it opens when you need more air to cool the engine. Yes, I know it's a ridiculous idea, isn't it, to get like 1/100th of a mile better gas mileage. That system, at least it's open. That means the car's not going to overheat, so we don't care about that.
It does help with aerodynamics, and it does help with cooling, but it also helps with heating. On real cold days when those active shutters are closed and it stops cold air from being drawn across the radiator, it will actually help heat up the engine as well. Not just cool the engine and not just work with aerodynamics.
Looking. Now you can see the camshaft is moving somewhat. The degrees are changing. Look at that. 0, 12, 6. Here, the cylinder number 1, it has some knocks, and so does cylinder number 4. Cylinder number 2 and 3 don't, but cylinder number 1 and 3 have not.
Now, what you want to look at when you're looking at PID data is you don't want to look at just cam position A. You want to see B. You want to see what it's calling for and what it's actually doing. And you want to see what kind of fuel quality you have in that vehicle while you're watching that, because that could affect all that stuff based on how it's actually running and driving and stuff like that. So it's not just that one PID. That one PID doesn't really tell all that much when it actually comes to how the vehicle is actually operating.
Assuming when they put the engine back together, they didn't put it together perfectly. They did what's called the short block. They put a new engine block in, but they reused the heads and the cams over. Not such a smart thing, really. And you can hear a little rattle. Hear that little rattle? That's not a normal rattle. That is an abnormal sound.
Running full of coolant, brand new oil and stuff in it. You can hear how noisy these engines are, even brand new. Now, if I put the cover on, it would quieten it down tremendously. But this is a fresh build, just done. The whole motor cleaned out, the cylinder head cleaned out, new injector seals, new spark plugs, new everything. I mean, I just got done building this motor, and you can hear this is normal. The high pressure pump, the clatter and stuff coming from the valve train, it's all completely normal. The only time that I've ever been able to get this engine quieter than what it is right now is when I actually built the cylinder heads myself, and I did all the clearances myself.
What I meant by the only time that I've ever been able to get this motor quieter is because I actually had to go in and set the valve lash the way I seen fit based on the specs that they give. So I went on the tighter side, and it did make it sound much cleaner. But the way you're supposed to do it when you do the short block is if the cylinder head is not damaged, it decks out true, there's no scoring or anything going on the underside of the valves, no burn valves, no anything like that, is you're supposed to reuse those same buckets back on those same cylinders that came from the factory that way. That is the noise, the clattery, the high pressure pump, the direct injection that you're hearing. That's the issue there, is you're not putting new buckets in to take up for that valve lash. You're reusing the same buckets, which they don't have wear spots or anything on them, but a lot of times from the factory, it's done so quick, you get this excessive amount of noise. When you could tighten things up and make it a little quieter, they just don't do that.
Coming from the engine that supposedly they had rebuilt correctly. And then he got it back and it got worse gas mileage than it did before they rebuilt it. So obviously they screwed something up. The exhaust gas oxygen sensor on bank 1, sensor 1, it's way off. Look, it's in the red, then it's in the blue. Exhaust gas oxygen sensor current changing. See, when it gets into the red, that's bad. It's only supposed to be minus 25 to 25.
But again, we go back to fuel quality. We need to figure out what type of fuel's in this vehicle. Have they got some shoddy fuel from somewhere and it's causing this indication that something's not right with how it's actually running, which can contribute to the sound, the knock, everything that I've spoke about that I've seen in the past, and it's because of bad fuel.
And it's going way over 25, and it's bouncing all over the place. So, at a minimum, You'd hope changing that sensor did it, and it's not an engine failure problem that causes those data to go up and down because it's not firing correctly. After all, this is a gasoline direct injection, turbocharged car, Ford Ecoboost, that had the bottom end of the engine replaced and used the older parts over. There are a zillion things that can go wrong with these complex systems. Pump's working, the valued pressure is pretty close to the actual pressure. So we know the running problem is not an injector problem. Going through the transmission data, so far that's all good. For sure those clowns didn't put the engine together correctly. Now, here's the insane thing. When they did the engine, put the new block in, used the heads over, they reused the timing belt, even though he told them, put a new one on, I'll pay for it, because the warranty didn't pay for a new belt, because it wasn't broken, right? So then they had to take it apart again, and they said they put a new timing belt on. Who knows if they did or they didn't? But if they did put a new one on, guess what? They put it on wrong, and that's why his gas mileage is lower.
To defend the shop and then not defend them at the same time, whenever we do the technical service bulletin for the short block, if the timing belt doesn't seem stretched or cracked or anything like that, there's no provision to replace that stuff. It says as needed. So the technician could lie and say, you know what, I'm just going to put it on there because it needs it. Or if it doesn't look like there's anything wrong, it didn't show that anything was out of time, the timing belt could be reused. Sometimes they do that. But if the customer did state, exactly like Scotty said here, that he would like a new belt put on, they should have done that. It was wrong on their part. I'm not defending that. But at the same time, they're probably so used to doing it and reusing the timing belt, because I've done these motors from 18,000 all the way to 60,000 and even beyond with an aftermarket warranty replacing them. And it just calls for whatever either the warranty wants to pay or the customer wants to pay. At that point, you're at their mercy and you have to do what you're being paid to do. If the customer's paying them or paying for the part, no harm, no foul, just put it in while you're there. The problem is the technician has to make a provision or think about, hey, this is not the typical situation. The customer has okayed a new timing belt. I need to remember to do that while I'm there.
Because before he was getting better gas mileage at the old engine, at least until it blew up, and this one gets worse gas mileage, because if your ignition timing is not correct, you're going to get running problems. Now, this is a very complex car with all this GDI fuel injection.
We have to go back to fuel quality. That's one thing that was not touched here. The ignition timing and stuff is going to do all kinds of crazy stuff with really bad fuel. And we didn't touch that. Scotty didn't go into that and look at fuel quality, didn't test for fuel or any of that here. That is a huge factor with how these vehicles run.
Supercomputers, and it can compensate for things a lot. But every once in a while, he gets in this thing and he drives up a hill and starts shaking like mad because the timing is so far off. You're always going to get a problem when you have timing, when you're going uphill accelerating, especially up mountains.
The customer said that they've had this to two other Ford places and they couldn't figure out what the shutter was going on with it, almost like it was misfiring, but it's already had a tune-up. So I pulled up misfire monitor. I'll pull up power balance. I go down here to there's my power balance. Now let's drive it and see what happens. As long as it's fairly steady across the screen, that's what we want. Alright, the vehicle's shuttering right now, and there's no misfire. Nothing's crazy dropping out, just all over the place because of the load of the throttle pedal, but that's it, nothing abnormal. Now I want to show you what to go into to check the torque converter or transmission, which is the problem. Then you go to powertrain, then you go to transmission. Erase all this stuff, it's not important for what we need. Hit the eraser. Now I want you to go down here to TCC, torque converter, clutch. So we want pressure. We want mode, TCC OSC mode. And current. Now I want to see what happens with pressure and current while the vehicle's actually shifting. And then to control the torque converter, I'm going to go up here to the box in the corner, click on it, highlight it black. Then I'm going to go to the hashtag over here on the right, hit it. Hit the button to control the torque converter. Now let's drive this thing and see when the shuttering happens, what happens to pressure and the current. What's going on here? Something's got to be going on, so let's watch that. Shuttering a little bit, not bad. Let's pull out here onto the road so you can see the little shutters. Shutter, 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 bad. Shutter, shutter. So as you can see, when the shuttering starts, the line pressure gets all funky, the current gets all funky, the torque converter shot in this vehicle. And the reason why the other shops couldn't find it is because a lot of people don't know how to look up and look at correlation for current and line pressure, and they really honestly don't know how to work the IDS system. Even though a lot of guys have been in the field for a long time, they still really don't understand how to use it to their advantage. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in a parking lot up here. I'm going to turn the torque converter off. I'm going to unlock it, and you're going to see there's going to be zero issue, no shutter, no nothing at all, once I take the torque converter out of the equation. Alright, the torque converter is now unlocked. See the top left corner? And you'll see that it won't shutter at all now. It'll just be nice and steady. Increasing speed. No shutter at all. Zero. Vehicle's driving like it's brand new. No issues, no shut, nothing. Just completely smooth. So there's a problem with that torque converter and the torque converter circuit. So chances are, with this vehicle having 118,000 miles on it, the trans is going to need to get rebuilt, and the torque converter is going to need to be replaced, just because it's not. You can't just replace a torque converter and expect everything okay. You don't know about the lines that go to it, the ports, the pressure ports, none of that. So let's look. Going up this hill right here, it was misfiring bad before. Yep, it's completely smooth now. No problem at all. Nothing. So, these people are going to need the trans rebuilt, and the torque converter is going to need to be replaced. I couldn't guarantee a warranty on putting a torque converter in this vehicle. I don't know what's going on with the fluid passages. I don't know what's going on internally to the trans, so I could put a torque converter in it and it lasts 2 or 3 months, and all of a sudden be plugged up again from debris or whatever else is in there malfunctioning. A vehicle with 118,000 miles, putting a torque converter in it and then expecting some miracle to happen and say, oh, it's all fixed. It's not going to happen all the time. This vehicle needs a torque converter.
He goes down like 4,000 feet, so going back up 4,000 feet, it's going to show up because the timing is not correct. And of course, it's a modern car. It doesn't have a distributor where you can reset the timing. Besides, it's bouncing all over the place. That means the timing belt wasn't put on right.
So, I didn't do this maliciously at all. This is strictly for educational purposes. You know, the fact of the matter is, a lot of guys have these expensive scan tools and stuff like that, and these computers and stuff, and they've never dug into exactly how to use them. Scotty may know how to use the basics of his fancy scan tool, but obviously there's still more that he could do with that, I would hope. to figure out what's going on with people's vehicles that he just hasn't done or hasn't learned to do. Just like other technicians in the field don't know how to use the manufacturer's computer unless they are a specialist like myself in the field to figure out these problems. Now, when you have a shutter so bad that your current and your pressures and stuff, you can see how they were blipping all over the place when the shuttering started. And then when I turned it off, it didn't happen at all. There was no more shakiness. There was no misfiring and stuff going on. All that shuddering and that really hard, like, knocking back and forth and the shakiness of the vehicle, that can also affect knock sensors, and that can also do stuff with timing. And a lot of people think that it's just clean cut and dry as valve train or a timing belt, and it's not. It can be fuel quality, and it can be transmission issues that are causing those other concerns as well, and mask and make it look like you can see what's going on when it's not. If that motor's running good and it's functioning, and you'd get some codes and stuff if that timing belt wasn't put on right, and it wouldn't have lasted as long as it did. There would be something very obvious there. There would be a lot more stuff going on with the cylinder data and stuff that was there, and it's just not there. Which leads me back to the issue that this person is having in this video that Scotty's showing you is fuel quality and or a transmission problem. Those are the two indications that I've shown you here with investigative data. And my experience in the field is specializing in these products with multiple engines under my belt. And I have the most data on the internet when it comes to this stuff. I'm not trying to gloat. I'm just trying to say there's a lot more to this stuff than just what some fancy scan tool can show you just in a few data PIDs. You really have to know what you're looking at when you diagnose this stuff. Y'all be blessed. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave me some feedback. This is not to attack Scotty at all, but this is to point people more in the direction of really learning what you're looking at, learning what your tool can do and what it can't do, and making sure you really understand how to diagnose things, because most people, when they get into these situations like this, they'll just throw something at it and say that's what it is when it's not. I've shown you a couple cases here where it looked like it was an engine, it looked like it was timing components when it wasn't. It was fuel quality, and it was a torque converter going out, and it caused a timing type concern because those knock sensors and that computer can pick up that kind of stuff and not give you clear, concise data right away, and can lead you in the wrong direction. Y'all be blessed. Thank you.